I think that podcast guesting, though, can kind of speed up that timeline a little bit because people are getting a better sense of you, your personality, your values, how you can help them, your knowledge. If your episodes are sharing all that stuff, which ideally they should be. But I think that can maybe even shorten that 32, like just trying to think of things that help you do your online business better and starting from a more relational foundation. And I think that podcast guesting is really awesome for that.
Welcome back to Oh My Pod, the podcast that teaches you how to launch, automate, monetize, and grow your podcast without the show taking you more than 2 or 3 hours per week to run. My name is Justin, and I'm usually joined by my fiance, Celine, but because we're in Italy right now, and we have been for the last couple of months, we literally don't have enough Wi-Fi to both be on calls at the same time. So it's just me for right now, which I think is pretty funny. And I wanted to start this episode by sharing a story. So I got this client, and he has a pretty big business. So he was able to get on quite a big podcast as a guest. Guesting is hot right now and everybody's doing it. So he goes on the show and obviously impresses the host, impresses the audience, makes a really good impression. He's a great guy. And after the episode was over, he got 9 clients from the single episode. And that's not 9 leads. He usually converts about 2 out of 10 leads. So let's say he got 50 leads, 50 booked calls from this podcast episode. And I think that that's largely because of his call to action, because of the way that he framed his call to action and the call to action that he used. And we're going to get into that in this episode and a lot more, the exact call to action that he used and a call to action that you can use to make sure that you actually are getting proper leads from your podcast episode. I didn't want to do this episode alone because I'm not an expert at podcast guesting. So I brought on true expert in podcast guesting. Her name is Kasey Hayes. I was looking around for somebody who was a podcast expert and I asked some of my friends and I kept hearing her name. And so I was like, you know what? She's got to come on the show. And I'm really happy she came on the show. She is so cool. And she's a writer first, which is really, really important because she really broke down how the way you pitch shows is actually going to make all the difference in whether or not you get accepted onto a podcast as a guest. And she goes into kind of how she pitches these shows. And really, it just comes down to her being a really good writer. So anyways, we get into that. We get into a lot more on this episode. If you like it, please just literally take 3 seconds and just drop a review. We're trying to get more reviews on our show. It's really important, really, really helps us. We do this all for free, obviously. And all we ask for is a little review. So if you like the episode, leave a review. And if not, then you can leave a 1-star review and we'll be really sad. Okay, enjoy. Okay, Kacey, welcome to Oh My Pod. I'm very excited to talk podcast guesting because I think that it's one of the hottest things right now. It's like everybody everywhere wants to get on all the podcasts, wants to have crazy guests on their show. And you are the expert, according to a bunch of people who told me that I should talk to you. So welcome. And how are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, Justin, I've been really looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, I'm ready to jump in. I feel good about it.
Totally. That is the way we want to be for a podcast interview, for sure. And as I mentioned in the intro that I recorded, yeah, it's just something that at the moment I'm getting a lot of hits on. People are always asking me, how can I get on better podcasts? How can I actually make sure that the podcasts that I'm going on are legit shows? And how can I make sure that I'm going to get results from going on and all these things? And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, I make the podcasts, I coach people in hosting them, and guesting is sort of it's an area where I'm willing to say that it's not my my area of expertise. And so that's the main reason that I'm super excited. And so the first thing that I would just ask you is, for if somebody was listening to this and they're like, okay, I don't know why I would want to go on a podcast in the first place. So somebody who's skeptical about going on podcasts as a guest, what would you tell them? Do you have a success story of some kind, or have you worked with somebody that's had a crazy result? Or I'm sure you have. So take it away.
I would say I had actually 2 really great results with the same client. So this client is a toddler sleep coach.
Oh, cool.
She's hugely successful in what she does. Her marketing funnels are insane. She is able to teach so many different aspects of sleep training to her specific niche. So one thing she brought up to me, which is really cool. I love when clients bring stuff up to me, have suggestions, have ideas. I really like the co-creation, collaborative aspect of getting to work with people
likewise.
on their strategy. It's so fun, right?
Yeah, totally.
So she had gone through Amy Porterfield's course. It was like some type of evergreen course. I'm not like fully brushed up on everything Amy Porterfield has, but I know her podcast is major and huge, and she has like astronomically awesome interviews on her show. And she was like, I have hard data for what I was able to accomplish with Amy Porterfield's course. I did XYZ formula that she taught, and here are the XYZ results that I have. Do you think it would be worth pitching me as a guest on her show? And I was like, heck yes. It was so cool. I was like, sometimes people shy away from like the bigger names, or like they get intimidated by that level of popularity. And I was really excited for her that she thought about it in a way of, no, I can offer value to this audience. Like, look what I've done, and I have the data to support it. Let's just see what happens. And I think that's one big aspect of podcast guesting people maybe overlook, is that it's kind of always a testing process, and to not be afraid to try things. And she was willing to go with it and go for it. And I wrote up a pitch that included all of that data and like really tailored it to Amy Porterfield and her team. And she got on the show. She did an episode with Amy Porterfield, which was like, what?
I was expecting something like, I was expecting something good, but that's like really good. That's crazy. Because do you know, did that do anything major for your client's career? Like, did she get some kind of like tangible results from going on that show?
I wish I had the follow-up data from her going on the show. That would like really put the cherry on top. But yeah, she kind of the success story, I think, for me was just like, oh, she got on the show.
Yeah, what a win. Yeah,
because like for me as the strategist, that's kind of where my role, and in the way that I do podcast strategy, that's kind of where my role ends, is like you've gotten on the show, now you get to take it from here, you get to make the most of it.
Yeah, of course.
Whether that's
all you can
tracking
do.
Tracking your sales, maybe trying to figure out like which clients come from that specific episode. And like sometimes the results from being on podcasts aren't like directly tangible too.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that might be another thing people think about, is how is this going to get me clients? Like, what is that? How am I going to know that that's going to help me? Especially people that are skeptical about it, like you said. And sometimes, the truth is that sometimes you don't know. Sometimes the benefits are indirect. Sometimes, you're expanding your network, you're growing your body of work so that you have content to point people to build your trust with people.
Totally.
Sometimes it can act as a discovery tool. Sometimes it can act as a nurture tool. It just depends on how it lands with your particular listeners and the audience that you're trying to reach. But there's like so many tons of benefits to podcast guesting, and I think it's fun. So,
of course, yeah, I agree.
If it doesn't feel fun, it might not be for you. It's not for everyone. So if you're already like, I don't know if I even want to do that, I'm all for like, don't force yourself to do things you don't want to do.
Yeah, then maybe just don't do it.
Yeah.
I have like 10 things that I was thinking, and I feel like a kid in a candy store, and I have to focus on one thing. But the first thing that I must ask, because I know that I will not be the only person thinking this, what was in that pitch that you pitched to Amy Porterfield? And did you pitch it to? It obviously, like, it wasn't her, right? It was her, like, her gatekeeper, who then obviously showed it to her, and it hit. So what are some? Is there a tangible? Is there like an actionable piece of advice that somebody could take from there?
I did not review the pitch before I hopped on this interview, which probably would have been great. But I can tell you that it's something I do for every pitch. So a lot of times people think that when they're pitching themselves, they need to jump right in talking about themselves in the pitch. Every single pitch that I send out, I make sure it's talking about the host and their show first, like the first line, and not just love your show. Something generic, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, did you listen to my show? Have you listened to it before? I loved X episode of your show because ABC, really specific, dialed in. And I actually do listen to every show that I pitch clients to, because I want to make sure it's aligned with their, values and beliefs and their energy, and make sure it's a good match. But I would say the first thing that I know was in that Amy Porterfield pitch was to make it about her and her course, especially because my client took the course, and that's why she had such great success.
Right. So that's kind of a really easy way into her her field of view is that like, okay, this person actually took her course. So she already has some type of a relationship with her because like this person's given her money. She's spent time consuming the course. So that's already like something unique that not just a VA can come up with or pitch to this person. So yeah, I totally hear you on that. And I feel like what you said about actually listening to the show is pretty big, because I think that a lot of people are taking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people are just like, for lack of a better word, like they're just whoring themselves out to any single podcast that will take them. And there's just like VAs just mass pitching everybody. And so like I got somebody who told me once, they said, oh, what I do is I go and I go to like minute 50 of their most recent episode. And that way I don't sound like a VA, and I sound a bit more like unique, because I say something not from the start of their episode, but from like minute 50 instead. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, but also awful. So yeah, but to tie a question in there. So from what I know, I might be completely on in the numbers. I'm sure the numbers are also changing all the time. But what I last heard is that there's about 14 guests for every one podcast. So 14 people looking to go on shows as guests for every one podcast that there is, like active podcast that there is. So that obviously, like from the outside in, looks like a very saturated market. So do you think it's too saturated? Do you think that it's becoming too convoluted or maybe as might not be the right word, diluted right now or something like that?
Yeah, I don't think that it is. I love that you have that number, because I have always just carried in my like brain that, okay, these pitches need to stand out in the inbox, because you just assume that hosts are kind of being inundated with all these pitches, not necessarily good ones. And so to help you stand out, you want to make sure that like you're being very intentional. Maybe you're not skipping to minute 50 and just listening to that 1 minute and using it in the pitch, but actually because you could miss so much. Like, how embarrassing would that be to miss the first almost hour of a conversation and pitch yourself based on something they said out of context? And it's like completely opposite of what they talked about in the show. And they're going to look at that pitch and be like, good. They didn't pay attention to anything that I said, delete. Like they're not going to.
Exactly.
And a lot of times, I just assume that if I don't hear back, they either, and that's another thing is like people are like, I never hear back. Like, how do I know if people are even reading them? And that's just, again, my mind is going in like 50 different directions of what I want to cover. But
yeah, of course. That's how you know that you're in the right career, I would say.
I'm like, oh my gosh, which thing do I say first? But just coming back to being intentional with it, like actually listen to the show, put the time in. And no one wants to hear that you need to put time in and that it's also going to take time to see results. It's not like a fast acting strategy by any means.
Right. So essentially what you're saying and it's a really good answer to the question. It's actually a perfect answer. What you said is like, you didn't know the exact like statistic or whatever, and neither do I. But what you do know is that hosts are getting tons of pitches. And so it actually something that I didn't really think about, but the actual pitch itself, like where you pitch them and the copy that you use to do it, I think people are just overlooking that. They're like, oh, which shows, how many shows, like, how big, like which, and it's just like, okay, well, I mean, like you can get great results from going on a show that has like 100 of your ideal clients in the audience. So it doesn't really matter how big. It doesn't really matter how many downloads. And honestly, I mean, for me, like if you are paying somebody to find podcasts for you to go on, then yes, it would be nice to kind of know that the show has active listenership. But if you're not paying for somebody and it's just your time and you're just sort of looking for some shows to go on, wouldn't really worry about like, maybe I'm wrong, but should people worry about the amount of downloads that a show has before going on? Or should they just look to lead with value and just go on the podcast? What do you think?
I think looking to lead with value is huge. And that's a great just concept to always keep in the forefront of your mind as you're guesting. Because you're getting to borrow other people's platforms. You're getting to borrow from the trust they've already built with their audience. It's sort of like this tacit endorsement of you and your skills and abilities that they've invited you, or you've pitched yourself and they accepted because they see the value that you could bring to their audience. And that's something that I think most of the clients that I work with don't take that lightly. I don't take that lightly. And that's something that you want to show up in your best energy for. Again, my mind is going in like 50 different directions.
That's amazing. Yeah, so is mine.
But yeah, so yeah, it's I don't think necessarily that audience size really is a big factor that I look at. I look at from what I can gather on my end, because, we don't have like the public, it's not public information how many downloads each podcast gets. So you don't really know, but you can kind of get a sense of.
Yeah. You can't know unless yeah.
So I kind of do like a full spectrum, just kind of look at like maybe their Instagram presence, their Facebook presence, how often they publish, how many episodes they already have out. And that's not to say that I don't pitch to like newer podcasts, because I do, especially if it seems like a really good fit for my client. But just kind of look at ratings and reviews and things like that, and know that each one of those is just one piece of the puzzle. So if someone only has 3 ratings and reviews, does that disqualify? No, not necessarily.
But it is something that you're looking at, reviews.
Yeah, I do. I take a look at that. And now, of course, as a podcaster myself with a fairly new podcast, sometimes it feels really hard to get those reviews. So even though we're asking
hard.
And it's tricky, and it doesn't mean that people aren't listening, and it doesn't mean that people aren't engaged or interested. It's just, sometimes people just aren't going to take the extra step for whatever reason, or at least not at that time. So you just keep asking.
I mean, you gotta really, really you gotta remind them 1,000 times and then catch them on a good day when they're it's crazy. I mean, I've listened to thousands of, I've probably, an example is I've probably listened to about 100 hours. Just recently, I've been binging it of Alex Hormozi's podcast, and he keeps asking me to leave a review, and I'm like, yeah, I will. I'm just at the gym right now. I'll leave one later.
I'm driving. Yeah.
And then I never do, right? So I'm a devout listener, but I have not left a review on his show. So okay. So that's a perfect lead in to, because we're talking calls to action. So let's talk about going on to a podcast. You come to the moment at the very end of the show, you've delivered value to the audience. You've impressed the host with your expertise. You've had an awesome hour. You had fun. And then they ask you the question of where can people find you? And I feel like what a lot of people do is just list off every link and their home address, everything, right? It's they just give everything away, and people are like, I don't want to take any of that. So what is a call to action that people can, or what is your recommended call to action when you go on a podcast?
My recommendation is to, as simply as possible, even if you repurpose something that you already have some type of special opt-in gift for the listener that relates to what you do.
That is epic. Yeah. So what could be an example of something like that? If someone was listening to this and they thought that of creating some type of thing, how can they kind of tie it into the person's show? You know what I mean? Or is that maybe not a good question? I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. So, especially if you're a coach, you could offer a free 15-minute session or 30-minute session, something like that, something that feels good for you. That's just an example. I think a client of mine offers that right now from a specific link that she has, so she knows that it's coming from podcast listener traffic.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I thought that was wonderful because
that's fantastic.
I would sometimes, with the popularity of podcast guesting, sometimes podcast hosts have a form for you to fill out instead of accepting email pitches. And I was filling out a form for her, and they asked, do you have a freebie? And so I was like, oh, I don't actually know if she has a freebie. Asked her, and she had created this special thing specifically for podcast listeners, which I was like, you're so brilliant. That's amazing. I'm going to just copy and paste. So simple. And it's so good for her on the back end to be able to track things.
Right. Okay, so just let me ask about, so she has just a free strategy session with her, and that's it, a 15-minute call for more information, and it's linked specifically for her podcast guesting appearances. Is that right?
Yeah.
That is a fantastic idea, because the other idea that I have been sharing with some people, actually, I'll share a story quickly. I was even wanting to put this in the intro, so I may say it twice, but who cares? So I have a client who has he has a big business, and he went onto a podcast, quite a big podcast, probably over 1 million downloads, something like that. And he, 1 million total downloads. I don't know how many per episode, but still a big show, right? And he goes on the show, and at the very end, the guy asks him what can people do to reach out to you, and he says just DM me a word from the show. So let's say you came onto my show and you wanted to say, DM me Justin, or DM me pod, like oh my pod or something, right? And so all you do is link the Instagram and say DM me this word, and then that whoever came from this specific podcast, not just podcasting in general, but this specific podcast, you can see how your results are. And I mean, it may not be like the biggest thing that moves the needle to know where the leads, like which show the leads are coming from, because some shows will get you a bunch, some shows will get you none, and some shows will get you some way down the line, and it doesn't really matter. But it's just cool to know, right? And so he figured out that he got 9 clients from a single episode. For him, that was $100,000 in cash collected, like from that episode. He didn't get 9 leads. He got 9 clients, and he converts about 2 out of every 10. So I'm not gonna be able to do that.
Wow.
Let's say maybe it's like 50 or something. So this is crazy, right? So the potential is huge, but that's just an idea that I thought is kind of cool. Like, it might be one too many steps, like getting them to Instagram and then DMing a word, rather than just having like a link that they can just click right in the show notes. I think that could be, it might be better to just do what your client said. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, do you think that that's like a cool idea?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, his results are amazing. That's like the ideal results everyone wants to have.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think the more data you can have like that, the better. And I guess it also just depends on your specific audience. Like maybe his audience already spends a lot of time on Instagram and they're like, oh, I'll just hop over there and DM him because I listened to him on the podcast.
And that's true. You hit the nail on the head. You're right about that. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think it just depends on your being dialed into your audience and being really clear on who's listening to you and where they're spending time. Because, if they're already on Instagram, that makes perfect sense why he was able to, 9 paying clients. That's insane. That's so cool.
100K, Kacey, 100K.
Yes!
I was like,
oh my God.
Some people don't make that in a year, and it's just like one podcast interview. And that's why I want to include that in the intro, because it's just so huge, right? And he's a client of mine. I did not get him on that show or anything like that, but just like a really cool result from that industry. But so if I was listening to this right now, I'd probably be thinking, okay, like where can I find shows to go on? Because anytime that there's like a lot of people like looking to talk to, like when there's like I said before, like maybe 15 people for every one show, I'm going to be asking, okay, like where's the best use of my time? And 2, can I outsource it to like a VA? Or 3, should I hire somebody to do it? Like hire you, I don't know. I'm sure there's lots of people who do it, but what would you say to those things?
Yes. So there's so many different ways to find podcasts to pitch yourself to, especially now that podcasts are having like this huge, I don't even want to say a moment anymore. They're just like, like the ball has left and is up in the air and who knows when it's going to come down, maybe never. And yeah, there's services like Podmatch where you can pay like a monthly fee, and I've never used it, so I'm not 100% sure how accurate it is with matches, but I know that's like an easy way to start. I think it's like $20 a month or something like that, and it'll match you with hosts that are looking for guests. There's also like directories where you can find hosts that are like, they're definitely currently active. That's like the first thing you want to look at. And sometimes I can sneak up on you if you are. I had to redo a pitch list that I had done for a client last week. I had thought I had already vetted everyone, because I go through and like vet everyone on the front end and make sure they're currently publishing, like their values are aligned. I've listened to episodes and have found a way to connect my client to the show.
I just want to say you sound very good at what you do. I'm like,
oh.
I'm like thinking right now, like if I want to do something like that, because I would love to get on more podcasts. And I totally have people who are always asking me. But anyways, sorry, continue.
Yeah. So all those things I take into account, and I must have just skipped one because I was kind of doing my due diligence, went back over one, and I was like, oh, whoops, this one hasn't published since like March. And it's November. Man. So I might not want to do that. So let's find another one. But yeah, it's once you've done it for so long and you do it so often like I do, it kind of becomes easier and like it's more free flowing to find podcasts and help people get matched to them. I use like Apple Podcasts. I'll search keywords in Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see what comes up.
Cool.
That's a really simple, just start there, check out all, because even still, I'm mind blown by how many podcasts are out there and how many podcasts are doing like valuable content that you can use as a business tool, not just to like go on and have conversations because it's fun and like you want to be friends with the host, which that's all cool. And ideally you do want to connect with the host, but you want it to have you want a strategy behind it if you're using podcast guesting for a business tool. So just keeping that in mind as you're searching, you can search Apple Podcasts, Spotify. There's also listen notes, and that'll kind of show you, trying to remember, I think it'll show you the last time they've published. And it's I just kind of use a combination of all three. And then
totally.
I'm also in like communities that, I'm heavily in the podcast community. So I know people that have clients that have podcasts, and there's Facebook groups that are based
There's tons,
on, like memberships where people sign up, and the whole purpose is to like guest on podcasts together. So there's all kinds of options like that where you can at least start and like figure out the type of podcast you want to be targeting for your specific niche in your business.
Cool. I love it. That's so valuable. Do you recommend that somebody do this on their own, or do you think that like their time is better spent elsewhere and they should hire somebody?
I think it depends on where you are in your business. Typically my clients have already hit their like first 100K, and like they have a VA, but maybe they've outsourced this to their VA, but their VA doesn't have this particular skill, or they're just not getting results with it. And so the client kind of ends up frustrated because like all this work is supposed to be being done on the back end, but maybe it's not because it hasn't been taught. Because, if you don't know the skill, how can you teach your VA to do it? Yeah,
of course. And it's all like I would just imagine that it heavily relies on the copywriting, and copywriting is a very, very, you're a writer first, which I think is that's your deadliest weapon, I think, because that's something that a VA has a really tough time replacing, even with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is at the moment still pretty transparent when somebody's using it. It might not be that for much longer. I was talking to a copywriter a few weeks ago who said that he's pretty sure that ChatGPT will become just as good as humans eventually, but which is too bad. I just think that you being a writer is huge, and I think that that's why if people are wanting to do it themselves, they have to be realistic that like it's going to take you way more time than somebody who is already an expert at it, and you're probably going to get way more no's. So from my perspective, it sounds like maybe guesting in general should be sort of a not advanced, but a further up the ladder business activity when you are comfortable enough to kind of outsource it to somebody else so that you can make sure that you're getting on shows that are a good fit for you and that you're not spending a ton of your time and wasting much of your time. But I also don't want to discourage people from reaching out to shows themselves as well, especially if they have skills as a writer or if they are comfortable doing stuff like that. But for instance, me, I'm not super comfortable doing that. Like I don't love cold pitching. Maybe my copy's okay, but I don't write cold emails. I just don't like that. So I would always look to outsource that. And I know there's a lot of people like me who feel like they have to do it themselves, and then they start doing it and it just drains them. So, but I guess my last question would be, before I ask where people should find you, I'm very curious as to what your call to action will be. It's very meta. But what's one piece of advice that you hear given to your niche, so to your perfect client? What's one piece of advice that you hear that you think is just terrible, that they should just ignore completely?
I have to say the prevalence of generic pitches, which I probably touched on a little bit earlier with, making the first line more about the podcast and the podcast host to show that you've engaged with them. Just the prevalence of bad pitches that are out there. People giving encouragement to just send it. You won't get a yes if you don't send it, and not really thinking about the quality of the connection that you're trying to make.
Totally.
And build the relationship really starts with the pitch. Mm-hmm. And podcast guesting and podcasting in general is a very relational platform. You don't want to start off with a shitty pitch that you send us,
exactly.
Making it about you. It's clear that you haven't really dialed into the show. It feels very like you're trying to use the person for their platform.
Which is exactly that's the shift that I think you touched on, which is a lot of people think that a guest going on a show is such a favor that they're doing to come onto your show. It's such a man, that's so nice of them. And it's Okay, but wait, what if it's actually just like completely equal and maybe even like tilted more towards the host? Because like you said, like it's a free opportunity to get in front of an audience that you did no work to build, right? And so what I think one of the nuggets of advice that you touched on that I didn't even like really acknowledge enough is just like that's huge.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you want to make sure you're bringing an equal, like you said, it should be equal, like an equal level of value. That's why it's so important to give as much as you can away. And I know that's like, you should charge for your time, you should charge what you're worth, and all the stuff that we hear, in coaching and in personal development and all that stuff. And that's true. But you also have to start somewhere with building trust. And people aren't going to buy from you if they don't trust you. And they're not going to trust you if you're gatekeeping everything.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, I mean, it's been said like a million times, but like you should just give and give and give and give and give and give. And Gary Vee said you should give, and then ask. But Alex Hormozi, who is like risen to being one of the top business moguls in history, is saying give until they ask. And so, I mean, and he's like a multi-hundred millionaire over, and he's going to be a billionaire pretty soon. And so obviously he's doing okay. So, and I think podcasting in general is a space where, I mean, like people don't pay you to listen to your show. So you're already here giving. So you believe in it already. You've bought into it. So, but if you give enough, then, and you wait for people to ask, then you've built so much goodwill that, I mean, yeah, I've been experimenting with that recently. I'm just like doing free coaching with people who are nowhere near in the right spot to be a client of mine. It also feels good. It's fun. I learn more about what people are struggling with, and being a guest on podcasts as well. Like you're going to learn from the host. You're going to network and build a great relationship, and you're going to get in front of an audience. And I mean, that's getting enough back right there. Like, and so like you're saying, like when it comes to the end, so yeah. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to just like throw in there? Something the conversation did not like complete or something like that?
Well, I was just thinking as you mentioned those two different approaches with Gary Vee and Alex, that I read somewhere, I can't remember where, but there's a statistic about online business, especially, that you have to have so many more touch points with your client before they'll buy from you, because you're not like an in-person situation. It's all online. Like it's something crazy, like 32, something like that.
Jeez.
And I think that podcast guesting, though, can kind of speed up that timeline a little bit, because people are getting a better sense of you, your personality, your values, how you can help them, your knowledge. If your episodes are sharing all that stuff, which ideally they should be. But I think that can maybe even shorten that 32, like just trying to think of things that help you do your online business better, and like starting from a more relational foundation. And I think that podcast guesting is really awesome for that.
Sweet. That's amazing. I love everything we just talked about. I'm sorry if I interrupted too much. I usually don't, but this is something I'm very excited about.
I love it. Yes.
I don't know why. I just am. Like just the podcast industry in general, I've just been so deep in it the last year, and it's just like any business industry. It just has folds and so many layers, and podcasting is especially cool space because there's also just a lot of like creativity, and it's just a very like it's just a very value first type of medium, and everybody in it just knows that they're here to provide like as much like help to people, and as much like easing as much pain as possible. And I love the industry. So and it's cool because I think I walked away from this interview with some knowledge that I can then go and give to people if they ask me about guesting, because now I learned a lot from this. So where can people find you, or where do you want them to go, or what do you want them to do?
Yes, thank you. So if you would like to try pitching yourself, if that's something that you think would be a good way to like kind of get your toes in the water, I do have a guest pitching checklist that will show you everything you need to include in your pitch and everything you don't, especially if writing is not, like you said, one of your top skills. And that's on my website, KaseyHayes.com. You'll see guest pitching checklist in the top menu bar there, and you can just download it right from there. I
love that. I'm probably going to go and download that right now and send it off to my VA and see if we can do something with that. But I would also like even maybe not at the moment, but at some point I would definitely love to work with you, because I do not want to go and find podcasts to go on. Like, I just don't want to pitch. I don't want to find them. I think what you're doing is like, you're in a great space because the industry is exploding, and you're like, it's just a no-brainer to have somebody do this for you, at least for me. So I hope people go to your website, download that, check out what you're doing over there, packages, whatever you've got going on. And thank you for your time. And thank you for, thanks for your time and bearing with my internet connection. Because as people know, I'm in Italy, and for some reason the Wi-Fi in Italy is just terrible. It's just like, oh, can't they fix that? Like, anyways, thank you so much for coming on. If you have any last words for the people, then feel free.
Just thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, and it's always so much fun to talk about podcasting with people who are as passionate about it as I am. So it was really, really fun.
Totally. Thank you so much, Kacey.
Thank you.
Okay, so you made it this far, which means you probably found something or learned something valuable from this. So don't be selfish. Please share it with somebody else so that they can learn something from it too. That's all we ask for all this free content. We're trying to build a community and help as many people as possible do better in podcasting, make better podcasts, get more from their podcasts in less time. That's our goal here. And if you want to support that goal, then just click the link and send it to one person who you know would love you for it.